Thank you all very much for coming. I'm Ethan Rarick. I'm the director of the Robert T. Matsui Center for Politics and Public Service, part of the Institute of Governmental Studies here at Cal. Thank you for coming to this 2012 version of the Matsui Lecture, which is an annual event sponsored by the Matsui Center. I want to thank our co-sponsor today, the Institute of Transportation Studies. They did a lot of work in helping to set this up and helping to promote this event, and so very much appreciate their assistance. A quick couple of words about logistics before I tell you just a little bit about the center. The requisite request, please silence your cell phones or turn them off. We'll all appreciate it, especially the person sitting next to you. After the congressman finishes speaking, we'll have some time for questions. There will be mics circulating in the audience, and so you'll just raise your hand. I'm going to come back up and sort of call on people to request to ask questions. That's another reason to turn off your cell phone, because if it rings, I won't call on you for a question. So if you have a question during the Q&A, just hold up your hand. A microphone will come around. We're recording this for webcast, so please wait for the microphone to get there so we can capture your question as well. And then after this event, there will be a brief reception in the atrium just outside of the auditorium. So I hope you can stay and join us for a bit of refreshments and maybe a chance to chat with Congressman Oberstar or Congresswoman Matsui. The Matsui Center was created in 2008 as a legacy to Bob Matsui, a Cal alum who served 26 years in Congress representing the Sacramento area. The purpose of the Matsui Center is to engage the campus community, but especially Cal undergraduates in politics, public policy, public service, and to open up for them the possibilities of life and career in public service. We do that through three principal ways. One are internship programs. We have programs in Sacramento, in Washington, D.C., in local government. For students who are here and who are interested in those programs, we have some application deadlines coming up. I urge you to go to our website, politics.berkeley.edu, and you can get more information about that, or you can find me afterwards. We also organize a variety of public events throughout the year. This is obviously one of those. If you look on the back of your program, if you took a program as you came in, there are some other upcoming events, including on Monday, an event we will have to watch the third and final presidential debate. At the last debate, we probably had 200 and 300 people gathered together to watch the debate. So I hope you'll take a look at that list of events and perhaps come to some of our other events. And then we also bring to campus distinguished visitors from a variety of backgrounds and expertise. And the Matsui Lectureship obviously is very much an example of that. Each year we bring a former member of Congress for a one-week residency. During that period of time, the member meets with classes, meets with student groups, has a variety of experiences on the Cal campus, and then delivers a formal public lecture, the Matsui Lecture. In all of this, since we established the center 4 years ago, we've had no stronger supporter than Congresswoman Doris Matsui, who took her husband's seat in the House after his untimely passing in 2005. The Congresswoman has been a wonderful supporter of the Matsui Center. She's also a Cal alum, so she is a proud bear. She and the Congressman met here at Cal, in fact. She's been here. We rededicated the center this past spring and dedicated some expanded and new office space. She was here for that. She's here again today to introduce our speaker. And so I must say a word of thanks to Congresswoman Matsui, who's been just a tremendous supporter of the Matsui Center and our programs and our students. So with that, let me introduce her, and she will introduce our main speaker, Congresswoman Doris Matsui.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you here today, and I had a really wonderful tour of this building, and I must say I was kind of filled with nostalgia as I was coming up Hearst Avenue and looking at all the sights. The emotion kind of tugs at my heart. I love Berkeley. I am a proud alum of Berkeley, and I must say that you think about many times that sometimes I really truly believe that as a grown-up adult now, I really truly appreciate what I've gained at Berkeley, at Cal, and I kind of wish that I could do this again. And in a way, I'm doing it again. But I do appreciate seeing all of you here. It is a thrill to be back at my alma mater, and it's a pleasure to be affiliated with the Matsui Center and this lecture. and everything that the center stands for. I do hope that today's events are something that you will take with you, the speech, and because the individual that I'm introducing is someone who I've known for a very long time, who was a dedicated public servant for a very long time, but beyond that too, who understood what it meant to have true public service, understood what it means to understand issues in a substantive manner and be able to apply it to the society at large. And that is my friend and former colleague, Jim Oberstar, who has been an absolute friend to me and always an advisor to all of us who still are in Congress. And I know he's spending this week here on campus, and from what I understand, he has been stellar. He has been meeting people, addressing classes, and connecting with many individuals, not only on campus, but throughout the Bay Area, too. After all, he is an expert on transportation, and his advice is always sought out continuously. And we certainly still do that, too, in Congress. You know, like Jim Oberstar has quite a history, but after college and a stint in the military, he became a congressional staffer. And when you think about that, he's really learned from the bottom up what it really meant to be in a congressional office and be on a committee. He worked side by side with Congressman John Blatnick, who was the chairman. At that point, we called it the House Public Works Committee. When Congressman Blatnick retired, Congressman Oberstar was elected to replace him. And upon arrival in Washington as a member of Congress, he sought a position, obviously, on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He spent his entire 36 years on that committee. And he is still somebody who understands the history and the reasons and why we have to move forward in all the infrastructure that we find very much lacking today. He served as chairman from 2007 until he left office in 2011, and as ranking member prior to that. From 1989 to 1995, he chaired the Subcommittee on Aviation, passing critical legislation that led to better maintenance, safer aircraft, and increased investment in airports and air traffic control system. And during his tenure as chairman, 300 bills and resolutions under the committee's jurisdiction were passed by the full House of Representatives, and nearly 200 were approved by the House and Senate. And I must say, I was privileged to be a part of his committee for a couple of years, and I don't know whether he's ever forgiven me for leaving that committee for the Energy and Commerce Committee, but I must say this, he's been wonderful because he made me sort of an associate member of the committee, and I must tell you this, I learned so much from him that was really to me so important in my role in Sacramento, because we're sort of the hub of all the infrastructure that you can possibly think of, whether it's transportation and light rail and heavy rail and buses, or whether it's flood protection or everything. He knows about Sacramento. In fact, his son, Ted, who's with us today, lives in my district in Sacramento. So I think I had an in there also. But what made him so effective is that he took the time. He took the time to counsel each of us. And he did that also with his constituents, too. He was a fierce advocate for his constituents, and he wasn't afraid to buck party lines if it was the best interest of those he represented. He played a vital role in passing the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which created and sustained hundreds of thousands of jobs, maintaining and improving our nation's transportation infrastructure, and helped improve the country's economy, blunting the impacts of the recession. And Congressman Oberstar also was very clear from the beginning of the stimulus debate that more funding should have been allocated to infrastructure improvements, and I agreed with him then. And it was unfortunate we did not apply more infrastructure funding. And 4 years later, I believe many economists agree with the position he took. When Congress lost Jim Oberstar during the Tea Party Revolution in 2010, we not only lost a leader on transportation issues, but an effective statesman. You know, I think about that because we went through a whole transportation debate. And earlier this year, as Congress struggled to pass the transportation bill, which for the first time in 50 years had been turned into a highly partisan issue by the House majority. Now, Jim Oberstar's leadership and institutional knowledge was sorely missed. We talked about you all the time, Jim. Gee, if Oberstar were here, this wouldn't have happened. But anyway, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I'm honored to introduce my friend, Congressman Jim Oberstar.
Oh, Doris, thank you. Oh, you bring back such wonderful, touching memories and such great experiences that we shared. I must supplement by recalling that my late wife, Jo, and Doris, during her time as spouse of member of Congress and working at the White House, were active in the group called Peace Links, to get spouses of members of Congress and women generally engaged in the nuclear freeze movement and to stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons and other causes that supported the principles and purpose of peace. And you were leader in that initiative along with Jo. She got a posthumous award from Peace Links, but Doris got an active award from Peace Links. And that brought us together in very special and personal ways. Sacramento is a safer city in which to live and raise a family, in which to work, because of Bob Matsui. Bob's relentless, visionary pursuit of the authorization of and funding for flood protection levees and improvements and strengthening of the levees, 36 miles of levees to protect the city, the Bay Area from Sacramento to Stockton against the ravages of the Sacramento and American rivers was a marvel of dedication to public service. And at one point I said, Bob, you and I are spending more time with each other than we are with our spouses. This is not good. He worked, his vision was to have a 200-year protection for flood control for Sacramento and the surrounding area. We eventually got the Corps of Engineers to agree to the kind of levee building that would provide a 100-year protection against the worst flood that could happen in 100 years, but with the capacity to withstand the 200-year imagined flood. And those works have been put in place against a very vigorous onslaught from the developers upstream who had a different vision and weren't interested in what would happen to Sacramento. And at the same time, there was this structural sword of Damocles hanging over the Bay Area in the form of the Auburn Dam, which others wanted to build. And Bob knew it wasn't a good idea, and we talked about it. I said, I'll come out and take a look at it. And got the Corps of Engineers to do a helicopter tour of this. And I asked a couple of questions and found that the foundations, the $200 million had been spent by the Bureau of Reclamation, and the concrete poured was right on the fault line. Bob said, I knew it. Can you stop that? I said, hell yes, we'll make sure. You know, it's hard to build something, a lot easier to stop it. And we're not going to let this thing happen. And we stood at this place that would have required all the cement production west of the Mississippi River. And Bob said, that's terrible. Can't let this happen. Well, there was this crowd from upriver, but they came against Bob Matsui and his friend Jim Oberstar, and the Auburn Dam no longer is in the picture. Not only that, but the concrete poured for the foundations wrongly has been removed. So Bob served his constituents, the state, and the nation in an exemplary fashion, a model of dignity, of integrity, of hands across the political divide, partnership for the greater good of the country. This center reflects and embodies the ideals that Bob Matsui believed in and lived, and that Doris continues in her service. Thank you for your service, Doris. Transportation. Our nation was founded by those who came on the water. Our first settlers came on ocean vessels. Our greatest cities were ports before they were cities. Transportation founded, created, sustained America. So retrospective is important. People like to look in 50-year blocks of time, but I think we have to go back 60 years. The seeds of our 21st century network of opportunity, dilemma, disappointment were sown in the 1950s and flowered in 4 distinct eras. Era of vision and investment, of deregulation leading to expansion and economic growth, of consolidation and contraction, and our current period of disinvestment and decline. The vision and investment years of the mid-1950s were extraordinary in both their impact upon transportation then and over the next half-century, and for the confluence of internally conflicting technologies. The Interstate Highway System and the Highway Trust Fund, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act and the Clean Water Program, the Federal Aviation Administration, built from the previous Civil Aeronautics Administration, the SS United States passenger vessel, the Boeing 707, the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, the ocean shipping container. The most striking confluence of transportation technologies is that of the SS United States, the fastest ocean liner in the history of passenger service in the Atlantic trade. 3 days, 12 hours, and 12 minutes to cross the Atlantic from New York to Le Havre in France. It's still the holder of the Blue Riband Award that for a century and a half had been awarded for the fastest transatlantic crossing. In an average year with 23 crossings, the SS United States would carry 43,700 passengers. I was one of them in 1957, returning from graduate studies at the College of Europe in Bruges, Belgium, to study European economic and political integration. The Boeing 707 entered commercial service on October 28, 1958, with a Pan Am flight from New York to Paris. In 1 year, that 707 would carry as many passengers as the Blue Riband winning SS United States. The 707 not only revolutionized long-distance travel, it fundamentally influenced the design, scope, and engineering of commercial aviation over the next half-century. Virtually every airliner today traces its roots to this distinctive aircraft. The SS United States was retired from service 10 years after that first 707 flight. But the 707 gave birth to the KC-135 military refueling tanker, to the 727, the 737, 57, 67, 777, and the 787. Interesting confluence of technology. President Eisenhower in 1956 signed the bill authored by my predecessor, John Blotnick, to give life to a dream of over 100 years to establish commercial service from the heartland of the United States in the Great Lakes with the 7 seas of the world, to build the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Seaway opened in 1959 with a grand ceremony including Queen Elizabeth and President Eisenhower. It opened the heartland of America, where 1/4 of all the industrial jobs of the nation were located, where 40% of agricultural production emanated, and shared that with trade of the 7 seas of the world. Yet the ink had hardly dried on Ike's signature on that bill when Malcolm McLean invented the container, a box offering more efficient, lower-cost shipment of goods by water. The St. Lawrence Seaway didn't know it, but it was obsolete the day it opened at the dawn of the container era. Its locks were built to a 78-foot beam. Container vessels needed half again that width in order to operate. Too narrow for the new generation. The Great Lakes at that time produced 1/3 of all the container shipments of U.S. maritime trade, yet less than 0.5% containers moved through the Great Lakes. Those containers would move by truck and rail to East and West Coast ports, and virtually nothing through the Great Lakes. Containerization technology revolutionized domestic international shipping, and few ideas have had such a profound, lasting, powerful effect as this simple concept. We've now graduated to the point of 1,000-foot ocean-going container vessels carrying 16 and 17,000 containers. 1970 was a confluence year. It was the year that private sector rail passenger service died and was reborn as Amtrak, a quasi-government corporation. That was also the year that the U.S. Postal Service the U.S. Post Office became the U.S. Postal Service, a quasi-government corporation. It was also the year that the United States Congress established the Aviation Trust Fund to assure a dedicated revenue stream to build airports, taxiways, and support the air traffic control system. The U.S. Post Office had, until 1970, been experimenting with what in aviation is called hub and spoke service, to gather mail from many communities, draw it into a central center to work the mail, and then redistribute it, send it back out by truck to smaller towns. Whether they at the U.S. Post Office had the idea of hub and spoke in aviation, it was certainly an idea that aviation picked up very quickly in just a decade. Termination of the railway post office, which was the car on the tail end of freight and passenger trains, made passenger service profitable. But the railroads didn't want passenger service. It was much more profitable to move goods that didn't need to be fed and watered and didn't have to be somewhere on time. And they wanted to discontinue that service. And as the U.S. Post Office moved to terminate the RPOs, the railroads worked hand in glove with them. You take the mail off the train, we can apply to the Interstate Commerce Commission for discontinuance of that route, and then cities lost passenger service and less than carload service, which then shifted to truck service. Prospect of losing all passenger rail service moved the Congress and the Nixon administration to create Amtrak to save what remained of intercity passenger rail, but without a sustainable funding mechanism. So in the very year that Amtrak was created without a funding mechanism, the Congress also created a sustainable funding mechanism for aviation. The technology of aggregating mail in a central facility, redistributing by truck, profoundly influenced the trucking sector, and later, hub-and-spoke aviation. The funding mechanism that worked for aviation was similar to that of the Highway Trust Fund. A dedicated revenue stream, passenger tax that was a percentage of the value of travel rather than cents per gallon, measuring your consumption of fuel rather than your use of the roadway. That proved to be a lifeline for the future of aviation. The latter half of the 70s introduced the era of deregulation, an inexorable force hastened by the advocacy of a Democrat in the White House, Jimmy Carter, and a Democratic Congress, which likely would have been much more slow to evolve had it been a Democratic Congress and a Republican president. In rather quick succession, deregulation came to aviation, to trucking, and to rail service. Maritime took a good deal longer, 25 more years before maritime service would be deregulated. It's obviously a much older service than all the others, encrusted with millennia of tradition. The idea was very alluring. Unleash the creative power of the competitive marketplace, unfettered by government regulation of pricing and market entry. Prices would go down, the theory said. Service would go up. Customers and providers, industry would benefit. The national economy would thrive. It was an irresistible siren call. And it seemed to be working. In aviation, I remember rubbing my worry beads at the podium as we voted on deregulation in aviation, thinking, oh, we're going to be towns in my district that are going to lose out on this. And so I offered the amendment to establish essential air service, to hold in service and fee and the cost of it covered by fees paid by international airlines using our airspace, though not necessarily landing in the United States. And I said, Mr. Chairman, without this amendment, there will be communities in my district who are so remote that the only way to get there without aviation is to be born there. I still don't know where that idea came, but it was at the right time, the right moment, and like you, everybody cracked up laughing, the chair put the gavel, and the question passed. And it's lasted for 30 years, and now this new Congress is trying to unravel it. So we had 20 new entries into commercial air service within the first 5 years of deregulation. The rise of leisure travelers, lower fares, expanded nonstop service, it all seemed to be working. Trucking exploded to pick up the need for less than carload service now that the railroads weren't serving small towns with less than carload service, which they did until the discontinuances with the U.S. Post Office. Not only did the LCL shift to trucking, but also the railroads quickly adapted to Malcolm McLean's container service and served as an intermodal medium, taking containers from dockside, bringing them to the heartland of the United States, offloading them to trucks to carry to their final destination. You're seeing this confluence of technology and of deregulation, and it seemed to be an expanding economy. From 1 million trucks in 1956, we went to 7 million trucks by the beginning of the 1990s. Railroads dropped their unprofitable routes to short lines. They mastered the unit train service. They perfected the 286,000-pound rail car. They invested in bigger, safer liquid tanker trucks. They made multi-billion-dollar investments in continuous welded steel rail. They moved to improved ballast, to concrete ties, and to satellite surveillance centers after being freed of passengers and liberated by Wall Street. But G.K. Chesterton, noted author, Riley wrote, that a revolution is a continuous turn in the same direction until you return to where you started. And so it has been with transportation and deregulation. Within 8 years of aviation deregulation, those 20 new entrant carriers were reduced to 5. 15 years after deregulation, there was only 1 left. And I used to ask audiences if they could tell me who that one is. I give them frequent flyer mile points. Most said Southwest, but it was America West. And now America West, too, is gone, absorbed by the consolidation of this industry. We had this expansion and then consolidation down to 4 domestic mainline carriers and a host of regional carriers. And internationally, we are now facing the prospect of 3 global mega carriers that will dominate world aviation travel. We all thought in passing deregulation that we could trust the Carter administration to enforce the antitrust laws. But little did we realize that Carter was going to lose the election, and the Reagan administration never met a merger and an acquisition that it didn't like. Rail was the last of the big 3 deregulation acts. In 1980, the Staggers Act found the railroads in favor of deregulation, shippers and consumers concerned. The Congress was divided, and in that atmosphere, the deregulation passed. We again relied on the Carter administration Justice Department. But within a year, that was gone, and the Reagan administration approved every rail merger. We went from 40 railroads, Class 1 railroads in 1980, to 4 Class 1 railroads today. 2 duopolies, 2 east of the Mississippi and 2 west of the Mississippi, and a host of small railroads, Kansas City Southern and 2 Canadian railroads. Trucking exploded from 50,000-pound trucks and 40 feet in length to 54-foot lengths, and 80,000-pound trucks, from 1 million to 7 million trucks on the nation's roads, with consequences for highway and bridge maintenance and highway safety. Maritime took a little bit longer. At the end of World War II, the United States had 5,500 merchant vessels, 25 million deadweight tons of shipping. We were number 1 in the world. By the time I was elected to Congress, took office in 1975, we had 800 U.S. flag vessels. We were 8th in the world. That was dead last. Ahead of us was the Polish fleet, the Baltic Atlantic fleet, the Russian Far East fleet, and soon COSCO, the Chinese fleet. Today, we have 37 vessels in the U.S. flag service, dead last. Our shipyards got too comfy building for the Navy with cost-plus contracts. They failed to invest in advanced shipbuilding technology. Our shipyards were saddled with higher costs than Korea, Japan, Greece, Finland, and China, and higher operating costs than Denmark, Greece, and China. In the interior of the United States, our locks on the Mississippi, Ohio, Illinois river system are in terrible condition. Round-trip barge traffic from northeast Iowa, Clinton, Iowa, to New Orleans, the world's most important grain export facility, is 820 hours. That's 6 weeks. Why? Because the barge tows are 1,200 feet long. The locks, except for Alton, Illinois, the confluence of the Illinois and the Mississippi River at East St. Louis, all the locks are 600 feet. The barge tows are 1,200 feet. There's only one at Alton that is 1,200. So you have to break the tow in half, send 600 feet through, send the next 600 feet through, lash the lines together, send them down to the next lock, and do it all over again. Now, if you look at a map of South America and you see the point of Brazil that sticks out in the South Atlantic, that point is the port of Recife. It's a general cargo facility. But just south of it is the port of Santos, 150 miles away. They export the same soybeans, sorghum, rye, wheat, and grains that we produce in the United States. Only they have a 2,500-mile advantage because they're that much farther out in the South Atlantic than is New Orleans. And so they have a 5-6 day sailing advantage coupled with a 3-week disadvantage on the Mississippi, and we are losing ground in the international world trade because we have not invested. In 1987, I held hearings on the 20th anniversary of the collapse of the Silver Bridge between Ohio and West Virginia. 46 people died. What's the state of bridge inspection, maintenance, and repair? A professor of bridge engineering testified at the hearings that bridge inspection is in the Stone Age. We're still dragging chains over the surface of bridges with our ear to the ground, listening for anomalies. Then, another 20 years later, the bridge collapsed in Minneapolis, and they were still dragging chains over the bridge to listen for anomalies. We haven't advanced the state of the art sufficiently to keep up with the changes in technology and the changes in use and the heavier trucks and the greater use of our transportation system. We found in 1987 that there were 78,000 bridges that were either structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. By the time of the collapse of the I-35W bridge in Minneapolis, we had 153,000 bridges in both categories, 78,000 alone structurally deficient, meaning they needed to be replaced. We don't have the money to replace them. We haven't done the job of maintaining them. Some of them weren't built to the right standards to begin with. And so we are in this period of disinvestment and decline. At the time of deregulation of aviation, we were flying 200 million passengers in the domestic trade in the United States. 2010, 750 million passengers. Worldwide, 1 billion people traveled by air. 750 million of them traveled in the U.S. airspace. We are responsible for 3/4 of all passenger air traffic in the world. The Southern California TRACON, Terminal Radar Control Facility outside of San Diego, handles more air traffic than all of Europe combined. That's a powerful force. Aviation's enormous. It's responsible for 11% of our GDP. And yet we need to invest in the advanced generation, the next generation air traffic control technology that will use satellite systems that will provide for safer distances, shorter but safer distances between aircraft at altitude, on approach and on departure, and to manage the growth that we expect in the United States in the next 15 years to 1 billion air passengers in the domestic U.S. airspace. Our needs are immense. We have to invest $40 billion in the next gen technology. That's to come from the airline ticket tax that unlike the highway user fee measures how much fuel you consume to extrapolate to see how many miles you're driving. The ticket tax is a percentage of the value of your travel, and that has steadily gone up, and so the investments have been able to keep pace, except that the Congress does not consistently make the investments necessary, and it took us 4 years to get an aviation authorization bill through. So there are huge challenges. Leadership should come from the White House or from the Congress. It's not been forthcoming in the way that it should. So the business sector, the commerce sector, academia, and the public needs to step forward. And that path forward has to be transformative. Path to the future must restructure the Department of Transportation. It's time. The department's 45 years old. I was present at its creation as a member of the staff of my predecessor, John Blotnick, who was chair of the Legislative and Executive Reorganization Subcommittee when Lyndon Johnson proposed to establish a Department of Transportation, saying we're the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have a Department of Transportation. So I was sort of a midwife at the creation of DOT. With our subcommittee, council, and we spent hours working on this. Johnson sent his team up to the hill, did it the right way, worked with us, worked with Senator Magnuson and the other body, as we quaintly say, and we held hearings in March, markup in April, floor action in May. We passed the bill. Johnson signed it in October to gather 34 agencies that were operating independently within the government into one department, so they would work together and learn from each other. They haven't in 45 years so much as had coffee with each other. We need to change that. So I introduced a bill in 1987 to establish an assistant secretary for intermodalism. I gave speeches on it. I got an amendment included in the 87 transportation bill. Nothing happened. Reagan administration didn't like the idea of expanding government to make it work better. And then in 91, we had the end of the interstate highway era. I tried again. We got intermodalism, and as the first word of that bill, ICE-T, Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. Guess what? Didn't work then either. So so then came our 2005 bill, and we crafted a committee, two commissions to study the structure of government, to study the delivery of funding of services and regulation and permitting. The commission completed its work. Steve Heminger, who's here, was on that commission and reported regularly on the work of the commission. I met with Steve and other members and said, I resolve as chair of the full committee not to allow this work to become yet another document gathering dust on a shelf. So I wrote this template, the magic of computers, where someone's going to turn it on. Oh, there you go. All right. So I wrote this template for the future of transportation, which was based on the study and the recommendations over a 2-year period of the commission. I showed it, I did this actually for Senator Voinovich, Republican in the Senate on the Public Works and Environment Committee. He liked it. I showed it to the senior Republican in our committee, and then to the Democrats, and then showed it to our Democratic caucus. This is what we need to do. We need to take all those modal agencies and the Federal Highway Administration, the FAA, Federal Transit, Federal Railroad, Federal Maritime Administration, Motor Carrier Safety Administration, St. Lawrence Seaway Development Commission, and bring into it also the Coast Guard, the Corps of Engineers, and the Amtrak, all of whom have roles in transportation, and require them to meet monthly, to develop safety plans, to develop efficiency plans, to share experiences with one another, and then to take the 108 categories for funding out of the Highway Trust Fund and compress those down into 4 formula programs: critical asset preservation and investment, highway safety improvement, surface transportation, congestion mitigation, air quality improvement. And then if you can go to the, and then the one column has all of the funding of the past, go to the next, metropolitan mobility and access. Our 68 to 100 major metropolitan areas, give them funding where this was 3 years ago, $78 billion in congestion cost. Today it's $110 billion in congestion cost. People are burning 3.5 billion gallons of fuel more than they would if they could drive at posted highway speeds. So our purpose is to reduce those congestion costs and give those metropolitan centers over a 6-year period $1 billion of money out of the Highway Trust Fund and Garvey bonds and private activity bonds and transportation innovative financing and state infrastructure banks and tolling congestion pricing authority with a public financing oversight to assure that those investments all reflect the public good. And develop a 6-year plan and annual progress reports and accountability. That's what we need to do to transform America, to meet the challenges of the 21st century. I showed it to the White House, to Senator Boxer, to Senator Inhofe. They all liked it. Barbara Boxer said, this is such a great, we ought to put this in the Smithsonian. That's probably where it'll wind up because they didn't do any of it. They took some of these ideas. Well, what happened? You need $450 billion over 6 years to improve transportation. And that means an increase in the user fee. And the surest way to clear an office in Washington is stick your head in and say, not fire, but a 5-cent gas tax. And they all run for the exits. Well, we're in a global economy. We're in a global transportation system. We're in a competition worldwide to lower logistics. I've traced the 60-year history of innovation, of expansion, of economic growth. We had a $340 billion economy in 1956 when the Highway Trust Fund was established. We have a $14 trillion economy today. That economy depends on transportation. You can order whatever you want from Amazon.com, but the internet service and the Ethernet cable doesn't bring that box to your house. A truck brings it there. And if that truck is stuck in traffic, you don't get your box when you want it. And so we have a responsibility for the future to do this kind of thing, to make a transformative investment in and change in the way we deliver transportation services, because China, India, and the European Union aren't waiting for us. China in 1986 had 167 miles of interstate quality freeway. Today they have 25,000 miles of 6-lane divided access controlled interstate highways, and they're on course to have 52,000 miles in 10 years. India is building, halfway through building the 25,000-mile Golden Triangle Highway network, again, 6-lane divided access controlled highways. The European Economic Community is halfway through a 20-year, $1.4 trillion investment in expanding their already successful high-speed intercity passenger rail service, a truck route through the heart of Europe, high-speed freight rail service to the central heart of Europe, and a 2,000-mile canal to link the North Sea to the Black Sea through the heart of Europe. We can't even move goods down the Mississippi River efficiently. They're doing it, they're investing in it, they're our competition in the world marketplace, and we're falling further behind. What do we need to do? Well, we must not stumble. We must continue investing in our foundations, and institutions like this, and the Matsui Center and University of California, Berkeley, with bright ideas and technology at your fingertips, will help us find our way forward and think our way through this. But in the end, it takes political will. You have to speak up. Thank you all for being so patient.
Thank you very much, Congressman. A lot of substance there for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and a microphone will come around to this gentleman right down here.
Congressman, thank you for your leadership through all these years. I want to ask you about the basic notion of congestion. The assumption is we have to eliminate congestion. My studies have indicated that congestion is a function of our land use pattern and of also cheap price of fuels, transportation fuels, and that congestion is inevitable given those circumstances. Your thoughts?
Well, sorry you missed my lecture day before yesterday. It was on land use planning and transportation investment. This week in Naples, Italy, the World Urban Forum is meeting. Land use planners from throughout the world are gathering, presenting papers, giving talks in Naples on land use and transportation planning. The automobile has stolen our public space. The city is really the center of economic growth and vitality, not just the United States, but elsewhere around the world. Lewis Mumford, whom I call America's urban philosopher, and I had the privilege to sit across the table from when I was at the College of Europe doing graduate studies on European economic integration, said of the city, it is the temple, it is the academy of learning, it is the hall of justice, it is the crossroads where the great issues of civilization are joined. We need to pay more attention to the needs of the city. Cities will have 6.8 billion people in the next 30 years. They'll be concentrated in major metropolitan areas. We've lost the public space. We need to reclaim that public space. We need to reclaim the mobility in urban centers. And you can't do that by adding more cars in the mix. We need transit systems. From 1895 to the end of World War II, it was possible to take a streetcar from New York City to Chicago, except for Toledo. Toledo didn't have service. We can do it again. We can restore intercity passenger rail and within-city mobility by investing in our transportation systems, our transit systems. You need a mix of them. You need light rail, commuter rail, you need streetcars, you need circulator systems, you need bus rapid transit systems. All of those, in some fashion, serve all of the needs of urban centers. European cities developed around the concept of the green, of the common area. Population was concentrated in city centers. And then there was the green space, both distributed within cities and outside the city. That's a model for us to work toward. The Paris Metro, I spent a week in Paris a year and a half ago, the Paris National Assembly, their parliament, Doris invited me to speak to their committee on the future of transportation. Imagine that, having un comité de transport à venir. J'ai fait toute une semaine à discuter en français avec les Français et les membres de l'Assemblée nationale. I spent a whole week talking on these issues. I said, what a delight. We don't have a committee on the future of anything in the U.S. Congress. Et après la dernière élection, nous n'avons pas d'avenir, je suppose. I said, and after the last election, we probably don't have a future. But I also spent time with the Paris Metro. They move 11 million people a day on the Paris Metro. That's 3.5 billion people a year. The TGV in France, when I traveled from Paris to Brussels in 1956 to begin that graduate program, it was a 6.5-hour trip, 186-mile distance. Today, that same trip is 1 hour and 15 minutes. You can live in Brussels, work at UNESCO in Paris, and be home for dinner that night, and people do. In March, the TGV celebrated its 2 billionth passenger in 30 years. In December of last year, the TGV paid $298 million to the French government. They paid $788 million over the last 5 years from profits. The TGV is profitable. Intercity passenger rail, the government upfronted the costs, and now the system is paying back. But it's paying back in much more expansive ways because it's opened whole regions of France to travel, tourism, development, and to economic growth, while maintaining the integrity of cities. The bicycle. In January of this year, Amsterdam conducted a survey of bicycle, of commuter traffic at the 4 morning and afternoon rush hours in the busiest part of Amsterdam, city of 3, 4, 5 million people. They found 2,750 bicycles an hour using the streets of Amsterdam in its busiest area. They have parking for 200,000 bicycles in the center of Amsterdam. 30% of all travel for all purposes is by bicycle in the Netherlands. Münster, Germany has a 48% mode share for bicycling. If we had a 10% mode share for transit in our cities across America, we would cut use of fuel $500 million a year and save 40% of our fuel in this country and import that much less from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Canada and wherever. So all these considerations mean alternatives to the automobile, preserving the public space, restoring our quality of life, reducing energy consumption, cleaner air, all mean that we can do that if we make the right investments.
Other questions? This gentleman right up here in the middle there.
Congressman, thanks for being here. I want to say thanks especially for establishing the Safe Routes to School program. I used to work within San Francisco, and it's a wonderful program. You should be proud for starting it, so thanks.
Oh, well, thank you.
I do want to ask about...
Congratulations on. I'm glad you're working on it.
I want to ask about what I see as, I think, the single biggest failure in transportation over the past 40 years, and that is to make the price of gas a real price. The reason why Europe is able to make these incredible investments is because they've been able to make the case to increase the gas tax significantly. The gas tax in this country has stayed the same for almost, 20 years now or something like that?
Yep.
So my question is, why have our leaders failed to convince the American public to raise the gas tax to fund our investments fairly?
Well, just a commentary. Safe Routes to School is now in 11,000 school districts across America. There are 11 million children participating in Safe Routes to School, and the number of requests for projects has exceeded by threefold the amount of money available. I think it's achieving its goal of changing the habits of an entire generation. We'll see that play out in coming years. But your question goes right to the heart of my whole presentation. It takes investment. Adam Smith, 200 years ago in The Wealth of Nations, wrote that if the public sector is productive in what it does, in its role, then the private sector in turn can be productive. And what he meant by that and wrote in that book is the public sector is responsible for the roads, the water systems, and had they had such 200 years ago, wastewater treatment systems. The public sector must do those things. And we did. The very first act of the first Congress in 1789 was to establish and maintain a lighthouse at Hampton Roads in Virginia. And the second act of the first Congress was to establish and maintain a lighthouse at Cape Henry in the entrance to Chesapeake Bay, both recognizing that guidance systems were needed for maritime navigation. And the Constitution directed the Congress to establish and maintain post roads. And we did that, first to deliver the mail, but also to deliver people and goods. And in 1956, when the Highway Trust Fund was established and at the beginning of the interstate highway system, the Congress enacted a user fee to pay for it, 3 cents, to build what was then estimated to be a $22 billion highway system, turned out to be $1.4 trillion. But that 3 cents was on gasoline selling for 30 cents a gallon. That was 10% of the cost of fuel, and there was only a handful of no votes. 390-some votes in favor of it. We were choking on congestion. We were on course to kill 100,000 people a year. Goods were moving slowly. We had 1 car per household at best in America. That 1 car traveled 9,600 miles. From that exploded the future of transportation. But 2 years later, the Bureau of Public Roads came back to the Congress and said, that 3 cents isn't enough, we need another penny. That 1 cent increase in the gas tax passed the House on a voice vote. Now, Doris knows you can't pass the prayer on a voice vote in the House today. So we've lost the sense of America, of the greater good of the country, in the face of the tax revolt that started right here in California. Prop 13. Professor Citron's very thoughtful book on a 30-year retrospective of the Prop 13 said those forces are still there. This anti-tax attitude, the Grover Norquist no tax pledge, has created a mindset that taxes are evil, they don't do any good, we can't accomplish anything with tax, we've got to cut costs. That still exists in Professor Citron's book, where surveys have been done just recently of the attitude of Californians. The majority of people still think that you can get to a balanced budget by cutting expenditures. Well, you don't get more with less, you get less with less. And sort of recapturing that common ground that there are investments that benefit the long-term growth of the nation must be a purpose of governance, and it has to start from the top. The president has to lead, the president's got to take initiative to educate the public and make the case. And that has not been done for a very long time.
Maybe two more questions. Let's go back over to this side, right there, Catherine. Yeah.
Congressman Oberstar, thank you so much for your leadership across American transportation. I'm Dan McElhenney with Caltrans here in the Bay Area. So welcome. Remember in 2007, April 2007, the MacArthur Mays tanker truck fire. There was a collapse of the bridges,
It
580.
melted. The bridge melted.
The bridge melted. It was closed to 580, 880, 80 interchange here in the Bay Area. You, at the federal level, the state level, local, regional, we all came together. In 26 days, we turned that around. I remember you on the site with us with mud on your boots, as you said during your speech. So thank you for your leadership during that turnaround. So America, we can do it. But my question is, with the recent federal legislation, MAP 21, what do you see as its greatest strength? And maybe what would you like to see included differently?
The strength was that Senator Boxer included in MAP 21 some of the highlight ideas from the bill that I described, that was summarized in that slide on screen. She did her best to incorporate the ideas of that legislation, project expediting, a freight goods movement system, but the shortcomings were compressing the livability issues that were the centerpiece of ICE-T, T21, safety, compressing them into one glob where they don't have standing and claim on funds from the core STP, Surface Transportation Program, and the core bus bike lane issues that we incorporated into law over a period of 3 authorizations. And the reason that Senator Boxer was not able to implement a vision is that the Senate was working under very difficult conditions. They did pass a bill that was much better than the conference report. They went to conference with the House that didn't pass a bill. That's never happened before. We've never had a House-Senate conference on legislation in which one body passed the bill and the other didn't. So the Senate was negotiating against itself. The House had moved a bill through committee that it couldn't pass on the House floor. So instead of passing a bill, they simply extended existing law for enough days to hopefully get through a conference with the Senate. That is the backwards way of doing things. That is the prime example case study of government gridlock, legislative inability to move in the greater good of the country. So and what they had to do was take $20 billion out of general revenue funds and put it into the Highway Trust Fund for nearly the first time. We did it 2 years ago, but that was simply taking out of general funds and restoring to the Highway Trust Fund money that had been borrowed from the trust fund in years past for disaster assistance. The disaster assistance dollars sort of come out of a different revenue stream. So we replaced $18 billion in general revenue fund. This was not a replacement. This was just taking those dollars out of general revenues and putting them into the Highway Trust Fund. And then when you look at that 2-year bill, it authorizes $10.4 billion for transit for the coming fiscal year, which we're in now, it's fiscal 13, and $10.5 billion for fiscal 14. But buried within in the bill is rather obscure language that translated says $2 billion of that must come out of general revenues. So the language of the legislation caps the transit funding at 8.4 and 8.5 and says that the other $2 billion must come out of general revenues, which means discretionary spending on transit for the transit account of the Highway Trust Fund. And that means that transit funding has to compete with education, with food stamps, with a whole host of other social goods in the budget. That's going to set back and I've had a look at the continuing resolution that, Doris, you're going to have to vote on in the lame duck session. My heart goes out to you. It cuts another $200 million out of transit. So we're going backwards. This whole transportation program is like the Soviet economy of a few years ago. The budget is not as good as last year, but better than next year.
One final question. The gentleman in the yellow shirt has had his hand up for a long time, so.
You were talking about the gas tax, and I was at the Lugar Institute about 4 or 5 years ago. We talked about this issue. As you go for more fuel-efficient vehicles and alternative fuels, you know, our infrastructure is going to collapse. So they're talking about quasi-systems of where the states and the government would probably end up funding the future of the roads, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
The goal must be of a sustainable revenue stream so that at the beginning of the project, you know you can complete it. You can undertake a 3, 4, 5-year project, like, say, the Brent Spence Bridge between Cincinnati and Kentucky. It'll take probably 4 years to blast into the mountain, expand the highway. That bridge is important. It carries 3% of the gross domestic product of the United States. The Woodrow Wilson Bridge in Washington, D.C. and the Washington, Maryland, Virginia confluence took 3 years to build. It was $2.4 billion. It carries 1% of the GDP of the United States. It's important to make those investments. So you need a sustainable funding mechanism that is not subject to vicissitudes of this year's budget crisis and next year's budget crisis and the one after that. The Highway Trust Fund highway user fee has been the most successful such mechanism, except for Social Security, that we've attempted in this country. Other nations have come and asked how you do it. That's how we do it. It is true that automobiles are getting more fuel efficient. The President has pushed hard for higher fuel efficiency. Fuel efficiency has been growing about 1% a year. That has had a negligible effect upon revenues into the Highway Trust Fund because people are driving more miles. But we haven't increased the user fee to keep pace with not the consumption of fuel, but the effect on the roadway, and that's vehicle miles traveled. One 80,000-pound truck going over a highway has the same effect, in fact, greater effect, than 9,600 passenger cars traveling over that same roadway. Trucks do pay a little bit more. They pay a good deal more, in fact, in the diesel fuel tax, and on tire tax, and on chassis taxes, and so on. But we need a mix of revenues to assure the revenue stream that we need to get that $450 billion 6-year level of investment, and then we're still not keeping ahead of the needs of the country. So I think that we need to experiment with the vehicle miles traveled, and that gets all the privacy spooks out into the open air, and they're worried about someone spying on them. Well, if you have a cell phone, Google knows where you are. You know, we can have filters into the systems that filter out where you are, but report on how far you've driven, how many miles you've driven, how much use you've made of the system. It will still take probably 4 or 5 years to implement such a VMT technology, but there are means of making the investments. In my transportation bill for the future, we had Garvey bonds, Build America bonds, we had tax credit facilities, tax exempt bonds, private activity bonds, public activity bonds, congestion pricing authority, tolling, where you can assure that the public interest is protected. I think we need to have a mix of revenue sources, but they have to be sustainable. And when you get into public-private partnerships, just take the time to download from the Congressional Budget Office a report printed in December of last year, a 40-page document on the concerns about public-private partnerships for protecting the public interest in those relationships, where the private sector investing in transportation has to make a profit on it. And how is that profit going to relate to the public good? What standards should be established? The European communities had experience with that question, and their infrastructure bank is headquartered in Luxembourg, and it makes loans to governments, not to private industry. It makes loans to governments to build major public works, like that 2,000-mile canal through the heart of Europe, like intercity passenger rail and truck routes and so on. And they measure every year the use of the funds and whether the revenue stream can be sustained. We need those kinds of mechanisms here. It's not a dead end. It can be done. We need a mix of revenues, but it's going to take leadership from the top to get this done in an anti-tax atmosphere. So the outcome of this election is going to have a huge effect on the future of transportation.
I think that's a good note to end on. As I mentioned before, there's a reception set up just in the atrium outside the auditorium, so I hope you'll all join us for a bit of refreshment, and please join me in thanking Congressman Oberstar. Thank you very much. Thank you.